Hello all. I hope you enjoyed the first lecture by Dr. Girish Pimpre sir, which was about the fundamentals of astronomy and astrophysics. Now, we will move towards the second lecture of this workshop, which will be given by Dr. Aniket Sure sir. I will introduce you with Dr. Aniket Sure sir in few words. Dr. Aniket Sure is currently working as a reader in Homi Bhabha Center for Science Education, Mumbai. Dr. Aniket Sure has completed his Masters in Physics from Indian Institute of Technology, Bombay in 2002. He has completed his doctorate in Natural Sciences Astrophysics from University of Potsdam in Germany. He has been working as a member of Homi Bhabha Center for Science Education faculty since November 2007, where he looks after the Indian National Astronomy Olympiad program. He is also the regional coordinator for International Olympiad on Astronomy and Astrophysics. Now we will look at the topic which is being covered by Dr. Aniket Sure. His topic is about the brightest star in the sky, which is the only and infinite source of energy on Earth, that is the physics of sun. I hope you will like and enjoy this lecture as well. Thank you.
So today, I'm here to talk about the star which is closest to us, that is the sun. Yeah, we see sun every day, and many of you would think, what is there to know about sun? But and probably if you see Wikipedia page of sun, you will see a lot of factual data. You will see uh, some explanation about the things. You will see numbers like this: how far are we from sun? What is its mass? What is angular diameter, physical diameter, density, and so on. And these numbers you will find on many data sheets. The interesting part, actually, you should all think about is uh, how did we actually came to know about these numbers? How did we know that, for example, mass of the sun is 2 × 10⁻30 kilograms, and so on? Each of these measurements, they have to happen in a particular sequence, and they were critically dependent on how science progressed through centuries. So knowing about how all these parameters about the sun were measured tells you a lot also about the history of science, the way science developed over centuries. I will not go in details of each of these things, uh, but I want to point out few things which may be relevant slightly later. Obviously I mentioned mass of the sun total as 2 × 10⁻30 kilograms. That is about 1,000,000 times more than mass of Earth. Then the diameter of sun is about 1.4 million meters. So, sorry, not million, billion meters, 1.4 billion meters, or 1.4 million kilometers. And average density is just 1.4 grams per cc. That is just more than density of water. But this is average density. We'll come to this in a bit. I'm mentioning these numbers for a reason. I will touch upon them slightly later. Another important thing, interesting thing to remember is every second, every second, sun emits more than 10 raised to 26 joules of energy. So its power, or we call it solar luminosity, is more than 10 raised to 26 watt. And this will be also be relevant. So let's quickly jump. Okay, before then, these are the parameters related to its observation and its position in the Milky Way. Many of these, again, you have to. It will be interesting for you to find out how we found values of each of these things. They will teach a lot about many of these astronomical measurements. Let's jump into the actually structure of the sun. The basic questions which solar physicists tried to ask for centuries was: one, why the sun is not collapsing inwards? and two, what makes the sun shine. What are the problems in both of these? Obviously, all bodies have gravitational force. Self gravitation is there, like it is there in Earth. It is there on Sun as well. Earth doesn't fall inward because Earth's crust is solid, and the inner molten lava is rotating. What exactly is there in the Sun? Sun being such a massive body, it has mass million times more than Sun, more than Earth. Why it doesn't collapse inwards? The people obvious answer to that is, if a force is not causing any action, probably there is another force which is balancing it, and that force is created by the energy which is being generated at the center of the sun. That energy is creating enough pressure outwards to balance gravity. So that comes our second question. So what exactly is producing that energy? Now the answer seems very simple in the knowledge of what knowledge you have, but the answer was not that simple 100 years back, and we'll come to that part of the story. So presently what we know about the sun is, we can divide sun in roughly uh, three parts which all have different layers. So the innermost layer is what we call as solar core, and then solar radiative zone, together we call as solar interior. The physics in both these zones is roughly of similar type. Then the outer layers, which are again subdivided. There is convection zone and there is photosphere. Then outside that, what we have is solar atmosphere, which has chromosphere, and then we have corona. It is not coronavirus. Corona is a Latin word, simply means crown. So this is crown of the sun. So it is solar corona. And this virus which is going around, it also has this pointy hairs coming out on different things. So it looks like a crown. So it is called coronavirus. So in a cartoon, the picture looks like this. The very bright yellow part here at the center is your solar core. Outside that, this greeny yellow part is your solar radiative zone. Outside that, this reddish part is your convection zone. Then there are sunspots. Then there is photosphere, on which you can also see sunspots. Then after that, there is a chromosphere outside that, and outside that, there is solar corona. So coming to the question which I asked earlier, what is the source of energy for the sun? Let's go 100 or 150 years back and think about what physics was known at that time. We did not know many of the things which we know now. So the physicists at that time thought in terms of the fuels or source of energies which were available at that time. One possible thing was like some chemical reaction, like burning the fossil fuels, coal, petrol, whatever you take. So suppose if you, and the solar luminosity we saw, it is 10⁻26 watt, that is 10⁻26 joules per second. So we can use that. It turns out we need about 10⁻19 kilograms of coal every second if we want to achieve the solar luminosity. 10⁻19 kilogram. That seems pretty small as compared to solar mass, because solar mass is 10⁻30 kilograms. But if you take solar mass as 10⁻30 kilograms and these many kilograms are burning every second, what should be the lifespan of the sun? It turns out about 4,500 years only. Obviously, our history is older than that. The sun can't be just 4,500 years old. People have been seeing sun for more than 4,500 years. So obviously this was not the answer. Then what can be the possible source? Okay, in thermodynamics we have learned about thermal energy. If a body is at a reasonably high temperature, the gas molecules will have energies of their own, and collectively this total energy of is all the gas molecules can be a source of energy. Now the total thermal energy will be of the order of n times k times T. That is, k is Boltzmann constant, n is number of molecules, and T is the temperature. That time we did not know what is the temperature inside the sun. So temperature on the surface, which is about 6,000 Kelvin, gave us a clue. Okay, what may be the roughly the order of energy we are talking about. With this NKT energy, if some of you may be doing back of the envelope calculation, and you will realize the lifespan of sun in this case will be less than 1 year. Then people thought about gravitational binding energy. That is, a body which is self-gravitating, it will have its own binding energy, but it is of the order of gm square over r. There will be some coefficient which we can ignore for the time being. It doesn't make much difference. So if it is of that order, in that case, sun's life would be about 30 million years. Okay, this is not too bad. Obviously, it is much older than the human population, but we have dinosaurs, dinosaur fossils, which tell us that they were there on Earth 65 million years ago. They got extinct 65 million years ago. They were there for from at least 220 million years onwards. So sun can't be only 30 million years old either. It has to be older than that. And that brought physicists to a conclusion that the existing mechanisms which they had to explain the sources of energy in the sun, they were insufficient. There has to be some new mechanism which they did not know at that time, that has to explain the energy inside the sun. And early developments in nuclear physics happened because of that push. The basic question which people are trying to answer is what makes the sun shine. And finally, they realized that there is nuclear fusion which can probably solve the puzzle. So a simple fusion reaction, if you have two protons, that is hydrogen ions. As you know, hydrogen atom consists of just one proton and one electron. You remove the electron, it is just a proton. So two protons combine to form a deuterium. Deuterium is isotope of hydrogen, as you know. And in this process, a positron is released and a neutrino is released. Electron neutrino is released. Then such a deuterium ion also combines with another proton, giving you an isotope of helium, 3 helium, and releases energy. Now these two such 3 helium ions, which are unstable, they combine to form 4 helium, that is helium's stable isotope, that is helium with atomic mass number 4, and they release 2 protons back. Remember the first two equations, we have one deuterium ion, it is used here, and it produces 1 helium 3. So now next step we are using 2 helium 3, so we should have both these reactions doubled. So combining these 3 reactions, what we effectively get is you have to start with 4 protons, which will give you 4 helium 4 plus 2 positrons, 2 electron neutrinos, and you will get some some energy in form of gamma rays. How much is this energy? So the total mass on the left side, that is the combined mass of 4 protons, is 10 raised to minus 26 grams higher than on the right side. Sorry for the typo. So if you take mass of helium-4 plus mass of positrons and neutrinos, if you want to be very precise, neutrino mass is much lower as compared to even electrons. So essentially we are talking about helium and electrons, helium and positrons. So if you take this, there's a imbalance. There's some small mass fraction which is missing. This is the mass fraction which gets converted to energy by famous E is equal to mc square, and this energy is released in form of gamma rays. So in this process, about 26 MeV energy is released. If you assume that this is happening and this process keeps happening with many protons inside the core of the sun, what will be lifespan of sun in this case? Assuming we can use the entire mass of the sun. So it turns out the mass of the sun in that case would be more than 100 billion years. This is enough to solve the problem of the age of the sun, because we know that rocks on the earth show that earth is about 4.5 billion years old. So obviously this is enough, but sun won't live that long, but I will come to that part a bit later. Say same discussion is shown as cartoon. This is the two protons combining to form a deuterium. It will add with another proton, form helium-3. Same reaction is happening here, and these two helium-3s come and form a helium-4, and then 2 protons are released back. Here the number of years is shown. It should be taken as inverse of the probability of this interaction. So longer the period, lower are the chances of this happening, and smaller the period, more are the chances of this happening. But sun has this tremendous mass inside, so even if the chances of happening a reaction like this are low, still there are enough protons around that somewhere this reaction will keep happening. So this slide also shows this simplified process which I explained is not the only way in which these nuclear reactions can happen. There is no this is not a computer program where everything has to follow one particular path and there is no other path available. There are multiple paths available for nuclear reactions, depending on they come in contact with which other elements. Reactions can undergo different kinds of changes. So what we just heard about is called PP, that is proton-proton chain 1. So PP1 starts from here. This is second step, and then we went to this as a third step. Now this step, that 2 protons combining to deuterium, happens 99.77% times, but 0.23% times is another way in which this deuterium can be formed, that the 2 protons and 1 electron get combined to form a deuterium. In this case, there is no positron because charges are now balanced. There is only electron neutrino. So this difference is not very crucial. Next, from here to this deuterium for adding with another proton to form 3 helium, this reaction happens. From there, 84% 0.92%, nearly 85% of the times, these two helium-3s will combine to form helium-4. And this is the proton-proton 1 reaction which we spoke about. But 15% of times, this 3 helium may itself combine with 4 helium to form 7 beryllium. If that 7 beryllium is formed, then it can combine to form with another electron, the electron merging in its nucleus to form 7 lithium, and then 7 lithium will add with a proton to give 2 atoms of 4 helium. This is called pp2, proton-proton 2. This happens about 15% of time. The 7 beryllium can also go to 8 boron, and instead of adding electron, a proton gets added, it goes to 8 boron. Then this 8 boron decays to 8 beryllium by emitting a positron and neutrino, and then 8 beryllium splits into 2 atoms of 4 helium. This is pp3. And there is this high energy reaction where 3 helium with a proton will directly give you 4 helium, but it happens very rarely. There is another mechanism by which stars convert hydrogen to helium. So this is called CNO cycle, that is carbon, nitrogen, oxygen cycle. As you can see, there is carbon, nitrogen, and there is oxygen in this sequence. So we start with 12 carbon, keep adding hydrogens. At the end, you will end with another 12 carbon and 4 helium. In this also, so going through various steps, 1, 2, 3, and 4. 4 hydrogen atoms are added, and you get helium-4 as output. Now, Sun is a star. In this graph, the x-axis shows the temperature at the center of the sun, at the center of the star. Y-axis shows the output power, that is luminosity, with solar luminosity as 1, that is 10 to 0. So on this graph, if you plot different stars, sun will be somewhere here, exactly at this point. Now, so what this graph shows, that this is the fraction of energy energy produced by the pp chain for different temperatures at the core of the star, and this is the energy produced by CNO cycle with some error bars on the both sides. So for a star like Sun, pp chain produces more energy than the CNO cycle. CNO cycle will produce only 10% or less than 10% of the energy. But for a star like a much bigger star than Sun, CNO cycle actually is the dominant source of energy production, and pp chain doesn't contribute much. The first question which I asked, what keeps the sun in shape? To answer that, we can work out a mechanism. Let me first describe it qualitatively, then I will also show it more mathematically. So nuclear fusion reactions in the solar core, they produce heat and radiation. The rate of energy production of these reactions depends on the local temperature and density, also on chemical composition and various other factors. At every point inside the sun, inward gravitational pull is balanced by outward pressure of expanding matter. The matter is expanding because the energy is being produced. And we also see that mean solar density at any given radius is stable. At different radii, the density will be different, but at any given radius, over time, the radius is the density is fairly stable. So if some gases are coming inside, adding to some layer, obviously some gases also have to go out. and that controls the movement of mass. This is the equation of continuity. And using these, we can plot how much mass is contained in what part of sun, how much luminosity is contained, is produced in which part of sun, and so on. These graphs we can look at them in detail later. What they show, for example, in all the graphs which I'm going to show in the next couple of slides, x-axis is what we call as fractional radius. That is, this is the origin is center of the sun, and when you say 1, that is the surface of the sun. So the solar radius is normalized in the range 0 to 1. And then here in this case, this is the mass and luminosity fraction. So this is the full mass of sun. So it is converted again, normalized from 0 to 1. Luminosity is also scaled from 0 to 1. What it shows, for example, is the luminosity of sun. If you take out the outside 70% of the sun, so take just the inside 30%, the sun will still have the same luminosity. The outside 70% parts, they don't add luminosity to. So whatever is energy production happening, it is happening in the inner 30%. Whereas mass, if you take the outside some 15% of the sun, then it will contain only say 1% of the mass, whereas inside part contains much larger mass. Obviously, since all the mass is contained in the inner parts, pressure is much more in the inside than the outside. This is the graph showing pressure, this is showing temperature. Inside it is more than 1 million Kelvin, 15 million Kelvin close to. Outside it is just 6,000. Density also, I said the average density is 1.4, but at the core it is more than 150 grams per cc. And if you go to some 0.6 or 0.7 solar radius, the density is already less than 1. So outside 30% are actually less dense than water. Inside regions are the ones which are much more dense. Similarly, where the hydrogen is located, where helium-4 is located. So inside, at the very center, about 35% is hydrogen. As you go outside, in different layers, layer-wise, this is a fraction of the hydrogen. On the other hand, outside, helium-4, you see there is more helium-4 inside because it is where it is getting produced, and a small fraction is transported outside. Also for the other elements like nitrogen fraction, oxygen, carbon, helium-3. Helium-3 shows a peak where actually the fusion is happening. That is where most of the helium-3 is. Helium-3 being unstable, it quickly combines with helium-4, so you don't see it much in other parts of the sun. So going ahead with the story, the energy is produced at the center and it is transported outwards by radiation and convection. The ideal gas equation holds for most of the solar plasma. At the very center, there are some quantum effects. At surface layers, you have to worry about Saha ionization equation. I can't cover everything, all of these in one hour, so you will have to look it up. And together, all these physics principles, they govern behavior of sun. Mathematically speaking, the same can be expressed as set of differential equations. The hydrostatic equilibrium, that is the balance between the gravity and pressure, is given by the first equation. The energy generation is controlled by second. Transport and equation of state, equation of continuity. The physics, all of you are physics students, you must have seen these equations in some form or the other. or at least you would recognize most of the symbols. You have to solve all these equations simultaneously at all radius values of inside the sun. Doing it analytically is extremely challenging, and that is why we solve this computationally, and the output what we get is what we call as the standard solar model. The graphs which I showed you in previous slides, they are generated as per that solar model. So transporting, how it happens? At the center, that it is very hot, they are very energetic particles, and out just surrounding the core there is a radiative zone, so where the primary mechanism for transfer of heat is radiation. Outside, once they come out, the upper 30%, outside 30%, the primary mechanism of transporting the energy is convection. So because at the center, it is very hot and all the particles are very energetic, they are rapidly moving in around in that region. So any photon which gets produced, that gamma ray photon which we saw in the nuclear reactions earlier, any photon which gets produced, before it travels long, it will hit something else and get absorbed. There are so many particles moving there. So such a photon's mean free path is just half a centimeter. So within half a centimeter, typically it will get absorbed, but then it will increase energy of that particle. It will become unstable. It will re-emit the photon, keep some energy for itself, re-emit everything else, and so on. So typically, these photons undergo 10 to the power 22 absorptions and emissions between their original generation at the core to eventual emission from the surface. And this process for any individual photon takes about 10⁶ years. I should not be even saying individual photon, because each time they get absorbed and re-emitted, some energy is left out with the particle which absorbed it. So the photon energies keep getting reduced slowly. So in principle, it is not the same photon which got generated. Each time it gets emitted, it is a slightly different energy photon. This I will skip. In this there is nothing. Okay, here it shows the mass fraction of different elements inside the sun. X-axis is atomic number, so it's starting from hydrogen as atomic number 1 all the way up to the uranium, and y-axis is abundance, but abundance is in logarithmic scale. So if you for 10⁻12 hydrogen particles, there is 10⁻11 helium particles, but only 10 lithium particles. So that is the big range we are talking about. As you can see, hydrogen and helium are most abundant, and then other elements are less abundant, and there is also a clear preference for the nuclei with even numbers. They are more abundant than the nuclei with odd atomic numbers. So how sun has gone through its life? As you might have read in many books, sun started as a ball of gas, and slowly that ball of gas collapsed to form a star at the center and a big disk around it. This disk had some clumps, and these clumps slowly came together to form the planets. Since the birth, sun has spent about 4.5 billion years to come to where it is now. It will continue living like this for another few billion years. Towards the end of the life, it will slowly start warming and expanding. It will go to about 10 billion years from the start. It will go to red giant phase, and eventually this red giant will explode to form a planetary nebula from the outer layers and white dwarf inside. Next interesting thing I'm going to talk about is rotation of the sun. Rotation of the sun is interesting because the sun doesn't rotate exactly like Earth does. When we say Earth is rotating, every part on Earth's surface rotates at the same speed, at the same angular speed. That what I mean. It is not that in Mumbai the duration of the day is 24 hours, but if you go to Moscow, it is only 23 hours, or it is not 25 hours. It is 24 hours day everywhere. But sun, it doesn't like that. It doesn't behave like that. At sun, when people studied the rotation of the sun, they were surprised that different layers of the sun rotated at different rates. This was pretty obvious even before we could see inside the sun, because sunspots at different latitudes moved at different speeds. That already had given us a clue. But by using helioseismology, and I will explain that in a minute, what is helioseismology, we were able to peek inside the sun, and what we saw that the equator of the sun. So in this graph, the left panel shows a cross section of sun. This is a computer model, obviously. Here again, from the center to the surface, so that is the radius 0 to 1, and the contours show orange means faster rotation, and as you go towards darker colors of darker shades of blue and eventually black, that means the slower rotation. The simulation doesn't cover the inside part close to core, but what we could figure out from this is that the outer layers, each latitude had different rotation rate, and if you draw the radius vectors from the center, then you will see that these parts of the contours, just except the surface part, these parts in the convection zone, they were all parallel to radius. Just at the surface there is a shear layer, and at the end of convection zone there is a shear layer where everything they all turn, and inside everywhere the rotation rate is nearly same. It doesn't depend on latitude. So like Earth. So interior of the sun rotates like a rigid ball like Earth. The convection zone has different rotation rate for different latitudes. Equator is faster. It rotates with this period of about 25 days, and pole nearly 32 days. For a given latitude, rotation rate is almost constant throughout the convection zone. So this feature is called as latitudinal differential rotation. The changeover layer between the two is what is called as tachocline, and then there is a second shear layer close to the surface. The rotation rates which we discussed, they are mean rates. There can be small variations around them, but roughly these are the average rates. Next we go to observing the sun. There are different methods to observe the sun. We can image the sun in different wavelengths. There is helioseismology. We can do neutron observations of suns. You can do spectral studies, Dopplergrams, magnetograms. So if you take a photo of sun, simple photo, you will only see this. Sun is too bright. So if you try taking a photograph, then you will not see too many features on the surface of sun. If you try to reduce the intensity, even those features will get lost. So the part which we see in this photograph is the photosphere of the sun. Photosphere, as that is the place from where the photons start to reach our eye. It is a very thin skin of the sun. You can say it is just a skin. So this skin is 500 kilometers in width or in thickness, and its temperature ranges from 6400 Kelvin inside to 4400 Kelvin just outside. Now, because there is a variation in the temperature, another interesting thing happens, which is more visible if you reduce the intensity and take the photo. This is the skin of the sun just on the outside. When we see the center of the sun, we see the most inside part of the photosphere, that is also the hottest part. When we see the sides, extreme edges of the sun, then that time we are not seeing this central part, we are seeing the outer layers of the photosphere itself. So what happens is the edges of the sun are slightly fainter, they appear slightly fainter as compared to the center of the sun. This is what we call as limb darkening. This limb darkening, actually you can see in the photos here, you can see the center is much more brighter, whereas the edges are darker. Then helioseismology I mentioned earlier. We know seismology is used to measure earthquakes or monitor earth activities inside Earth. So helioseismology, seismology is study of vibrations. Helio is sun. So vibrations inside the sun or waves traveling inside the sun are studied in helioseismology. Given the material composition of sun, some waves traveling inside the sun can have a stable format. Some waves can't have stable format. So what people do, they keep on observing which waves are stable, and by knowing which waves are stable, they try to model, given these waves are stable, what kind of interior there must be inside the sun. And we have found thousands of such frequencies of stable waves. We have thousands of data points to fit to, and this is how we have improved our models of the sun. Then there are Dopplerograms. What is a Dopplerogram? Everybody has heard of Doppler effect, which measures velocity of the sun, a velocity of any source of sound or light. So what Dopplerogram does is it takes different parts of the sun and measures velocity of each part. Now, if you see this picture here, clearly here the color coding is as per the velocities, and you can see scale at the bottom. Clearly, one side is appearing to have velocities of 2 kilometers per second. Other side is having velocity of 2.5 kilometers per second in negative direction. Why is it happening? Obviously, that is because of the rotation of the sun. So, what do we do? If we take these Dopplerograms and if we take many Dopplerograms, take average of it, we can find the average velocity of rotation of sun. Subtract that from the picture and you will see what are the other movements on the surface of sun. If you do that, you see this granular structure, which is movement of gases on the surface of the sun. This is what we call as solar granulation. Each granule has a typical size of about 1000 kilometers and it survives for a few minutes. each granule hot gases come up from the center and relatively colder gases go down along the outer rim. This is similar to what happens in when the water bubbles, and they are really big. So this arrow size is, for example, 10,000 kilometers, which is roughly the size of Earth. And this is an animation which shows how this granulation works. This is again a computer model, obviously. Okay, then we come to sunspots. Sunspots, these are the regions of slightly lower temperature on the surface, or what we call as photosphere. We can see them here. The center is much darker, that is, it is slightly cooler, and outside there are these threads in all directions which show movement of gas from sunspot. Galileo himself observed these sunspots rotate on the surface of sun. That's how he concluded the sun rotates. We know rotation of sun since last 400 years, and we know about sunspots since last 400 years. And as they rotate, they also change their shape. As we can see clearly in the sunspot evolving, here it is much more round in the first frame, and as it goes down over the time, it becomes much more spread out. It splits in several smaller spots. The sunspots are regions of high magnetic field. They are usually found in pairs with opposite magnetic polarity. That is, there is a positive magnetic field and negative magnetic field. Now you can see here the evolution of this sunspot. This is a region which you can see how it is evolving. These are combining to form a bigger spot. Now, how sunspots get developed? The sun has its magnetic field. Earlier I mentioned that sun keeps rotating at different rates at different latitudes. Since the solar convection zone has very high viscosity, the magnetic field lines get trapped in the material in the convection zone. Now, then this material starts rotating or is rotating at different angular speeds. So the material near equator starts rotating much faster than the material at other latitudes. So these field lines get twisted over and over again, and finally when they break, you get sunspots. As you can see from this magnetogram, that is image of the magnetic field of the sun, all sunspots are always in pairs, where dark is one polarity and white is other polarity. Each sunspot is always in a pair. The pairs may not have the identical shapes, but they will have the sum of the magnetic fields in those regions would be the same. So temperature of the sunspots is lower than the average. When the neutral potential line between the two spots is sheared, it is twisted, then material or gases from that along the neutral potential line get ejected. This is known as the solar flares. After the flare, the positive and negative areas are again connected by the magnetic loops or magnetic reconnection lines. This is just image showing that this is a sunspot and the magnetic field is shown on the right panel. So right panel is magnetogram and left panel is the optical image. This material which gets emitted, sometimes it falls back on the sun We call it solar prominence or flare, and sometimes it can escape completely outside. Here you can see the line between the sunspots, and material will get ejected from there. That was the bright spot, and as it was fading, you could also see some material falling back along the lines of magnetic field, like these. Now, I've said Galileo was the first to observe the sunspots, and as he kept observing the sunspots, then many researchers after him, they started seeing a pattern. This is a number of sunspots I've seen every month since 1700 to 2000, and I'm sure you can see a pattern. The peak number of sunspots, the peak happens every 11 years, roughly 11 years. The size of the peak is different. The spread of that each curve is different, but the periodicity is always the same. And this is what we call as the solar cycle. Every 11 years there is a maxima, every 11 years there is a minima. Again, the same is shown. This is more detailed graph. The lower panel, you can see how much area of the sun is blocked by the sunspots, and you see 11-year pattern. The upper one is called butterfly diagram of sunspots. I don't think I have time to go through the butterfly diagram, so I will skip that, but people should look it up. This is also something very interesting, and corresponding magnetograms for the butterfly diagram. What do we know about the present thing? I showed data about till 2000. This is the data for last 20 years or so. We had one solar minima at around 1996, 1997. Then another solar minima at 2007-8, which was a bit extended, not many sunspots. Then we came up again. Then this maxima was much shorter, around 2014. Whatever solar maxima was, it was much shorter. Going ahead, we have now last couple of months we have started the new cycle 25. Hopefully we'll see a good cycle this time. Before 1700, what happened? Before 1700, for 60 years, there were no sunspots or hardly any sunspots on the solar surface. Why this happened is still unknown, but we call this as a Monte minimum. It is not observational bias. We clearly know that this happened because people were observing is one part, but we also see when there are more sunspots, we see more absorption of charged particles in the trees because which get showered from sun. So even in the trees, we see that these 60 years there is hardly any absorption of charged particles. So clearly sunspots were not there, and this Monte minima is one of the outstanding mysteries of the history of sun. This also corresponded to mini ice age in many countries. Because there was less activity on the sun was a bit cooler, what you can say, than the average, and that is why there was a drastic reduction in the temperatures around the world. Lastly, we come to spectroscopy of sun. This is just the optical region of the sun expanded a lot, so that you can see all the absorption lines in the spectra very clearly. Some of the lines are fairly bright. So Fraunhofer was the first one to study spectra of the coming from the sun, and he found 9 prominent lines which are known as the Fraunhofer lines. They correspond to these certain elements like a hydrogen, calcium, iron, and so on. As you know from basic spectroscopy, the absorption lines happen when the radiation passes through a relatively cooler gas, and that cooler gas absorbs that radiation. In case of sun, that cooler gas is in the bottom layer of the atmosphere, that is what we call as chromosphere of sun, and that gives rise to absorption lines. So by studying the absorption lines in solar spectra, we can study solar chromosphere. This chromosphere is a slightly thicker skin of sun, which is 2000 kilometers wide. It is above photosphere. The density is much smaller than photosphere. That is why it doesn't obstruct the light completely, but it only absorbs a part of it. The temperature is also lower than photosphere. That is why there is absorption spectra. And outside that, there is solar corona, the crown or the atmosphere of the sun, which spreads millions of kilometers. The density is much smaller as compared to the photosphere. That is why we don't see solar corona on normal day, but it is very hot. And when there is a lot of activity on the sun, there can be also emissions from the corona, what we call as coronal mass ejections, and they travel through the solar system, including passing around Earth. So there are 2 spacecrafts called Stereo A and Stereo B placed in the Earth orbit at different locations, so that we can get a 3D study of how radiation travels, the particle showers travel from sun to Earth, and here we see output from their models. This is another example of this coronal mass ejection, where a big flare started and then it is seen in all the instruments which were observing the sun. When this charged particles from sun, they hit Earth's atmosphere. They can't hit everywhere because Earth is also protected by magnetic field. But close to the magnetic poles, they can enter Earth's atmosphere. There they react with the particles in Earth's atmosphere, and that produces the aurorae. And we see this aurorae in the sky in northern hemisphere, near Canada and Siberia and Finland and things like that, those latitudes, also in the southern hemisphere on Antarctica. Okay. And I will end the talk with some pictures of sun taken in different wavelengths. Not all of these are optical pictures, so don't think these are photos of sun. Some of these are taken in UV, some of these are taken in X-rays, and so on. So, thank you.